The wind in Juniper Hollow carried the scent of cedar and riverstone, brushing against her sun-flushed cheeks like a whisper of things unsaid. Annalise Rowan pulled her shawl tighter as the coach wheels creaked away behind her, leaving her standing alone on the packed earth of the town's main street. Around her, life moved at its own steady rhythm. Horses snorted in the distance. A bell rang somewhere near the church and a small boy dashed by chasing a chicken. But Annalise stood still, rooted not by the unfamiliar town, but by the truth she had read just hours before. Dear Miss Rowan, I regret to inform you that I cannot in good conscience proceed with our arrangement. I have met another more suited to my station. I hope you find happiness elsewhere. Thomas Merrick. No apology, no compassion, just a dismissal delivered coldly through ink and distance. She had traveled nearly 800 miles with 2 trunks, and one hope that Thomas, the man she had written for over a year, would meet her at the station and fulfill the promise of a new beginning. But he wasn't there. Only the silence of the street and the weight of the letter. Still, Annalise wasn't one to crumble. With squared shoulders and a heartbeat rattling like thunder, she lifted her chin and began to walk. The boarding house, painted a faded blue with white trim, sat at the edge of town beside the mercantile. A carved wooden sign swung on rusted chains Rufina's room and table. Inside, the air smelled of lavender soap and biscuits. A voice called out before she reached the bell. Well, you must be the poor girl left standing by that no-good Thomas Merrick. Doña Rufina, sharp-eyed, wide-hipped, and wrapped in a scarlet apron, emerged from the back kitchen, holding a basket of laundry. She was a widow who ran the house like a queen and knew every whisper in town before it reached the wind. Annalise flushed. Word travels fast. Faster than a horse with a burr under its saddle, Rufina said, setting down the basket. Come on in. I'll get you a room. I only have a little money, Annalise said quickly. Then you'll earn your stay, Rufina replied with a wink. We could use a hand with cooking and teaching the little ones their letters. You look like the kind who doesn't mind working. I am. Good, Rufina's tone softened. Honey, you've still got your boots on. That means you're still standing. And that's more than I can say for some. Later that evening, after supper and polite questions from boarders, Annalise stepped outside onto the porch. The sky was awash with hues of purple and gold, and fireflies danced like scattered stardust. She exhaled deeply, letting go of the breath she hadn't realized she was holding since that letter. Then she saw him, a man walking toward town from the woods, tall, broad-shouldered, carrying a coiled rope over one shoulder and a basket of apples in the other. His stride was unhurried, his face weathered but kind. He nodded at her from a distance as he passed under the light of the porch lantern. Evening, he said, voice low and gravel-smooth. Good evening, she replied, her voice steady. He paused. You must be the woman who came for Thomas. Her lips pressed into a line, that obvious. No shame in it, he said. You're not the first to be let down by a Merrick. His eyes met hers, not with pity, but something steadier. I'm Caleb Walker. I run the orchard up by Clover Ridge. Annalise Rowan. He tipped his hat slightly. Well, Miss Rowan, welcome to Juniper Hollow. It's not perfect, but you might find it's just enough to start over. And just like that, he walked on. Annalise woke to the smell of cornmeal porridge and brewed chicory drifting through the thin walls of the boarding house, like a reminder that life carried on, with or without broken hearts. Sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, casting golden lacework across the quilt she had pulled tight around herself during the night. She lay there for a moment, letting the sounds of morning fill her ears. The clatter of plates, muffled laughter, footsteps overhead. It wasn't the rustle of silk sheets in her parents' parlor back in Maryland, nor the rattle of the train that had brought her west. This was different, earthier, real, and she needed real more than ever. Downstairs, Doña Rufina was already a whirlwind in the kitchen, flipping corn cakes and shouting orders in a mix of English and Spanish to a teenage boy named Javier, who clearly had more enthusiasm than coordination. Morning, Miss Rowan, Rufina said, not looking up from the sizzling pan. You're just in time to earn your keep. Can you slice tomatoes without bleeding? Annalise tied on an apron. I was raised on embroidery and needlework, but I think I can manage. That's the spirit. By mid-morning, the breakfast rush had passed, and Rufina had finally sat down with a cup of chicory in one hand and a thick ledger in the other. You're educated, she said, her eyes never leaving the page. I taught at a girls' school for 2 years, Annalise replied, wiping her hands on her apron. Then I'll introduce you to Pastor Green. He's been looking for someone to help with the town's children, lost their teacher last winter. To what? Consumption and a lack of common sense. Rufina sniffed. She never wore a coat and chased boys in the river. Annalise smiled in spite of herself. I'm not much for river chasing. Good. This town has enough scandal without adding more soaked petticoats to it. Later that day, Annalise followed Rufina down the dusty main street, the sun warm on her shoulders, and a gentle breeze fluttering the ribbon of her bonnet. They passed the church, the feed store, and finally came to a low wooden building, painted pale yellow, modest but welcoming. Inside, a small group of children sat on benches reading aloud from tattered books. An older man with silver hair and warm eyes stood at the front, guiding their stumbling voices with quiet encouragement. "This is Pastor Green," Rufina announced. "And this is Annalise Rowan. She's here to save your school." The pastor smiled and shook Annalise's hand gently. "We've been praying for help, Miss Rowan. If you're willing, we could sure use your light." Annalise looked at the children, barefoot, sun-kissed, wide-eyed, and felt something shift inside her. "I think," she said slowly, "I'd like to try." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the streets emptied, Annalise walked home through the orchard path behind the boarding house. The scent of apples filled the air, sharp and sweet, and she caught sight of someone atop a ladder between the branches. "Caleb." He glanced down, brushing sweat from his brow with a forearm. "Didn't think you'd stay," he said. "I almost didn't," she admitted, "but Rufina put me to work before I could pack." A slow smile tugged at his mouth. "She has that effect. You work here alone." "Mostly. My younger brother helps sometimes, but he's off trading in Harper's Mill." "I like the quiet." He looked at her. "Helps me think." She hesitated. "You said I wasn't the first woman Thomas let down." "You're not." He climbed down the ladder, wiping his hands on a rag. "Thomas thinks love is something that arrives all polished and pretty. But out here, love's more like this orchard. It needs pruning, patience, and a hell of a lot of weathering." Annalise was quiet. "Then did someone teach you that?" "My wife," he paused. "She passed 5 years ago." The silence between them deepened, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was like the hush before the first snow-expectant calm. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Me too," he replied. "But I learned the hard way that life doesn't stop for sorrow, just keeps planting seeds whether you're ready or not." They stood there in the orchard, surrounded by ripening fruit and the humming promise of something not yet named. Annalise stood at the front of the one-room schoolhouse, her palms lightly resting on the edge of the teacher's desk, watching as 14 pairs of eyes blinked up at her with a mix of boredom, curiosity, and mischief. The eldest looked to be nearly 13, the youngest no more than 5, with a missing front tooth and a permanent smudge on his cheek. She took a deep breath. "My name is Miss Rowan. I came from Maryland, but I was not born with a silver spoon. I know how it feels to be left out and told you don't belong." Her eyes met theirs steady. "But here we'll learn together, and no one gets left behind." A silence settled like dust in the morning sun. Then a hand shot up. "Can I bring my goat tomorrow?" Laughter broke out. She smiled. "If the goat knows his letters, he's welcome." The first week was hard. The children were spirited, the books worn, and the ink bottles frequently spilled. But every evening, Annalise walked home with her sleeves stained and her spirit lighter. The school gave her something she hadn't felt in months: purpose. Roots. One afternoon, she stayed late to clean the blackboard. As she stepped outside, she nearly collided with Caleb holding a basket of apples and a wrapped paper bundle. "You look like you could use a break," he said. "You brought me a snack." "I brought you lunch." "You missed it again." He handed her the bundle. "Rufina says if you skip one more meal, she's marching down here herself." She unwrapped it to find warm cornbread and slices of cured ham. Annalise leaned against the railing of the schoolhouse steps and bit into the bread. "You always this thoughtful." "No," he said, sitting beside her. "Just with people who remind me what hope looks like." She paused mid-bite. "You don't know me." "I'm learning." She glanced at him. The weight in his words wasn't flirtation, it was honesty. And that more than anything startled her heart awake. A few days later, trouble came knocking. Thomas Merrick. He sauntered into town on a glossy chestnut horse wearing a new coat and a smug grin, followed by Clarissa Wainwright, daughter of the wealthiest landowner within 3 counties, all curls and ribbons and practiced smiles. The town buzzed like a kicked anthill. Some glanced at Annalise with sympathy. Others whispered behind fans. Thomas strutted into the mercantile where Annalise stood buying slates for her students. "Well," he said, with a smile that didn't touch his eyes, "you're still here." She turned slowly. "It's a small town, hard to vanish. I figured you'd have gone running back east." He glanced at her apron, the chalk smudge on her cheek. "This doesn't seem your place." She met his gaze head on. "It wasn't. I made it mine." Thomas blinked. Clarissa drifted in behind him, her voice sweet and clipped. "You're the one who wrote all those letters, aren't you?" How romantic. So old-fashioned. Annalise smiled, sharp, not sweet. Romance isn't old-fashioned, but honesty seems to be. She paid for the slates and walked out head high. Later that evening, she found herself by the orchard again, needing air and space and the comfort of something that couldn't speak in half-truths. Caleb was by the fence repairing a broken post. The scent of pine and crushed grass hung in the breeze. He came back, she said almost to herself. I saw. I thought I'd fall apart. Did you? She shook her head, not even a crack. He leaned on the post, his eyes soft. That's because you've already built something stronger, something that doesn't need him. They stood in silence. Then she said, Clarissa called me old-fashioned. I call you brave. She looked at him surprised. You didn't run, he said simply. You stayed. That matters. It rained the next day, slow and steady, like the land had been waiting for it. Juniper Hollow glistened beneath low clouds, the dusty streets turned to puddles, and the orchard behind the boarding house shimmered with silver droplets clinging to every leaf and branch. Annalise stood under the overhang of the schoolhouse roof, watching the children splash toward home, with shoes in hand and laughter in the air. One girl turned back to wave, curls soaked and eyes bright. You're the best teacher we ever had, she shouted. Annalise smiled, her chest swelling with a kind of quiet pride she had never felt in the city's parlors or between the pages of Thomas's letters. Later, with her lesson books wrapped in oilcloth and her boots squelching through the soft mud, she walked the long way back through the orchard. The trees were heavy with rain, and the air smelled of wet bark and promise. She didn't expect to find Caleb there, but she should have. He was beneath one of the oldest apple trees, inspecting its root sleeves, rolled up the rain, making his shirt cling to his arms. When he looked up and saw her, his expression softened, like the sky just before the storm breaks. You always walk in the rain, he asked. Only when I need to think. He gave a small nod. Me too. They took shelter together under the great canopy of the old tree, its limbs thick and sprawling leaves dripping in rhythm with the hush of falling rain. For a while, neither spoke. The quiet between them had begun to feel natural, like breathing. I was engaged once, she said suddenly. Not to Thomas. Before him. Caleb looked at her, surprised but patient. His name was Everett, a banker's son. My parents approved, but I didn't love him. She paused, brushing damp strands of hair from her cheek. I wanted love like the novels said, something with weight, with fire. I broke it off and they never forgave me. And then Thomas. She gave a rueful smile. He made me believe he saw me, but all he wanted was a wife who sounded good on paper and didn't talk too loud. You deserve someone who listens, Caleb said quietly. Not someone who measures your worth in silence. Annalise felt something shift, not just in the orchard or in the sky, but deep inside her. A seed beginning to crack open. That evening, Doña Rufina was waiting for her on the porch, shelling peas into a wide tin bowl. Her eyes, sharper than ever, followed Annalise's every move. You've got that look, Rufina said, like a woman who just realized she's not alone anymore. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. Annalise sat beside her. He's kind, steady, honest. Rufina said, tossing another handful of peas. And he lost someone. You can see it in his eyes, but he never let it harden him. That's rare. You approve. I approve of anyone who makes you look like that. Rufina smiled slyly. And if he brings more apples, I might just marry him myself. But not everyone shared Rufina's warmth. The next day, Annalise was called into the church by Pastor Green. She expected a conversation about the children or perhaps a book donation, but found instead Clarissa Merrick seated primly beside him. We've had a few concerns, Pastor Green began carefully from members of the congregation. Clarissa folded her gloved hands. It's about propriety, really. A woman in your position, recently rejected unattached, should be cautious about her reputation. Annalise's spine straightened. I haven't done anything improper. Clarissa's smile was all frost. Not yet, but spending time alone in the orchard with Mr. Walker is noticed. Annalise turned to the pastor. Is my teaching in question? No, he said quickly. The children love you. This isn't about your performance. Then what is it about? Clarissa rose. It's about understanding your place, Miss Rowan. In this town, people talk. Annalise met her gaze evenly. Let them. The whispers spread faster than wildfire across Juniper Hollow. They trailed behind Annalise, and the mercantile rustled behind her in the pews and clung to her skirt hems like stubborn burrs. Women who once smiled now averted their gaze. Mothers pulled their children closer as if kindness were contagious. Even the children noticed their glances wary, their chatter laced with mimicry of the groan. Annalise swallowed her pride in long, aching gulps. She hadn't done anything but walk beside a man in the rain. But for a woman like her, unwed and outsider, and no longer considered pure property, even decency could be twisted into scandal. Rufina tried to comfort her. "Give them time," she said, pressing a warm roll into Annalise's hand. "Small towns got small minds, but hearts can grow when you shine enough light." "I don't want to fight," Annalise murmured. "No," Rufina said, cupping her cheek, "but sometimes just standing tall is enough of a battle." That evening, a sudden storm rolled in dark clouds, muscled over the hills, and wind howled like a pack of wolves. The rain came hard, slashing sideways across windows and rattling shutters like bones in a tin cup. When the power flickered out in the boarding house, the children cried, and Mrs. Bixby, who was nearly blind, stumbled in the hallway. Annalise lit every lamp she could find, tied up her skirts, and moved like a woman born for order, in chaos, comforting, guiding, steadying. Javier burst through the door, soaked and breathless. "Caleb's chimney got hit by lightning," he gasped. "He's fine, but the roof's torn open, and he's trying to fix it in the middle of the storm." Rufina opened her mouth to protest, but Annalise was already pulling on her coat. She found Caleb on the roof, silhouetted by lightning, trying to secure a tarp against wind that fought him like a demon. Rain had soaked through his shirt, his hair clung to his brow, and the edges of the roof groaned under every gust. "What are you doing up there alone?" she shouted. "I was fine." "No, you weren't." She climbed the ladder without waiting for permission, boots slipping slightly on the wet rungs. Together they fought the wind tying down the canvas, their hands brushing again and again through the storm. At one point he grabbed her wrist to keep her from falling, and something passed between them, raw and spoken, undeniable. Finally, with the tarp secured, they collapsed inside, dripping and breathless beside the hearth, where the fire had barely survived. "You shouldn't have come," he said softly. "I couldn't stay away," she replied. "Not when I knew you needed someone. You've already got enough people talking. Let them talk." He looked at her, then not like a man unsure of what he was seeing, but like one who'd been waiting for it all along. "I told myself I wouldn't get close again," he said, voice barely audible over the crackle of the fire. "Losing Anna, it carved something out of me." Annalise reached for his hand. "I'm not asking you to fill what was lost," she whispered, "only to let something new grow." Their fingers entwined, damp and trembling. And in the warmth of that broken little house, while thunder rolled overhead, something in both of them began to mend. The next morning she returned to town with rain-matted hair and muddy boots. Clarissa was waiting on the church steps, lips tight. "You spent the night." Annalise didn't flinch. "Yes." Clarissa sneered. "You've ruined whatever respectability you had left." Annalise took a step closer. "Then let me be clear, Miss Wainwright. I won't apologize for kindness, for courage, or for standing beside a man who treats me like an equal." Pastor Green, who had overheard from the doorway, cleared his throat. "Miss Rowan, you've done nothing wrong. In fact, I'd like to speak with you about organizing a reading group for the widows." Clarissa paled, "But," "I think," Pastor Green said gently, "it's time this town started judging character, not appearances." Annalise walked away, her back straight. Annalise stood in the center of the church hall, holding a stack of books bound in worn leather and twine. Around her, more than a dozen women, widows' wives, young mothers, even the skeptical Miss Lydia from the millinery, took tentative seats in the wooden pews that had been repurposed for the reading group. There was no lectern, no pulpit, no men to lead. Just a woman once considered ruined, now offering something many had forgotten how to ask for a voice. "I thought we could begin with the Pilgrim's Progress," Annalise said, gently passing out the volumes. "Not because it's about salvation, but because it's about journeying through hardship and finding your own path." A murmur passed through the room, then silence. But not the heavy kind. This one was soft waiting. Miss Lydia spoke first, voice low. "I haven't read aloud since my wedding night." A few chuckled. Annalise smiled. "Then let's change that." The group met weekly, and slowly, like a frost melting from fields, the town began to thaw. Women stayed after to talk. Some began helping at the schoolhouse. Others brought baskets of preserves to Rufina's kitchen or left books at Annalise's doorstep with hopeful notes tucked inside. But not everyone welcomed the shift. Mr. Harlan Graves, the town's self-appointed moral guardian, made his disapproval known during Sunday announcements. "We must be vigilant," he warned from the pulpit. "Satan often wears a bonnet and teaches children big ideas." The congregation tittered uneasily. Caleb, seated beside the pastor, didn't flinch. After the service, he caught Annalise's hand beneath the elm outside and whispered, "Bonnet or not, I like your big ideas." She laughed, truly laughed for the first time in weeks. The orchard was blooming early that year. Pink and white blossoms dusted the trees like confetti from heaven. One evening, Caleb walked her through the rows with a basket on his arm and a quiet question burning in his eyes. I know this isn't a courtship in the usual sense, he said, and I'm not offering you fine silks or letters filled with poetry, but I'm offering something real. She stopped between the trees. You don't need to offer anything. I'm already here. He touched her face like she might disappear if he moved too quickly. I care about you, Annalise. I care about you too, she whispered. They kissed soft and hesitant at first, like the petals brushing their shoulders from the trees above. Then deeper, steadier, as though something long buried in each of them had finally been uncovered and given light. But nothing bloomed in peace for long. A week later, a letter arrived, official sealed and bearing the stamp of the County Education Board. They had received concerns about her curriculum. Too many advanced topics, too much encouragement of free expression, and too close a relationship with a known widower. They were sending a supervisor. Rufina crumpled the letter with a growl. Those cowards couldn't fight you straight on, so now they'll try to box you in. Annalise paced the kitchen. If they find reason to remove me, I lose everything. The children, the school. You'll still have us, Caleb said firmly. But she didn't want just pieces of a life. She wanted the whole thing. She wanted to belong. On the day the supervisor arrived, a thin, pinched man named Mr. Dalton Annalise wore her simplest dress and braided her hair back with quiet defiance. The children stood straighter that morning. Even Javier helped clean the chalkboards without being asked. Mr. Dalton observed the lessons with stiff silence. At recess, he wandered the orchard's edge taking notes. When school ended, he asked to see her alone. I've read your records. Impressive background, he said flatly. Thank you. But these additions, composition essays, critical thinking questions, town history reports, they're unconventional. They're effective. He looked at her over wire-rimmed glasses. You were a rejected mail-order bride, correct? Her jaw tightened. I'm not sure how that pertains to my ability to teach. It pertains to public image, respectability, the community's trust. I've earned the trust of this community, she said. One student at a time. He said nothing, just scribbled in his notebook, then left with a parting glance that chilled her to the bone. The verdict came in a letter sealed in stiff parchment and hand-delivered by the postmaster. Annalise opened it slowly on the back porch, the wind tugging at the hem of her skirt, her fingers steady despite the tightness in her chest. While your teaching methods have yielded positive student engagement, your presence continues to be a source of concern. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your position pending further review. There was no mention of her students' improvement, no recognition of her efforts, just cold bureaucratic dismissal hidden beneath the word concern. She folded the letter with quiet precision, and then she walked to the schoolhouse. The children were mid-lesson when she stepped inside. Javier looked up from the blackboard, eyes wide with worry. Is it bad? She nodded. Gasps rippled across the room. Little Susie started crying. Thomas Green, all of 10 years old and fierce with indignation, slammed his slate onto the desk. They can't just take you away. I'm still here, Annalise said softly, moving to the front. I'm not going anywhere just yet. Will we still have school? Someone whispered. She hesitated, then not officially. But what if we came anyway? She smiled, something quiet and full of pride. Then I'll be here to meet you. That night, the boarding house was filled with the scent of molasses, bread, and tension. Rufina baked like a woman with a battle to fight. Caleb showed up muddy from the field storm in his shoulders. They can't do this, he said. We should go to the county office, raise hell. They didn't fire me for how I teach, Annalise replied. They fired me because I don't fit into the picture they want to paint of this town. Caleb leaned in, voice low and firm. Then we repaint the picture. She looked at him, truly looked, and saw the weight he carried, his orchard, his past, the expectations of a man supposed to stay silent. And yet here he was, standing with her. What if we started our own school, she said suddenly. Outdoors under the orchard trees. We don't need their walls or permission. Rufina grinned wide. Now that's the woman I took in. Caleb reached for her hand. If you build it, I'll make sure the land is ready. The next morning, they hung a hand-painted sign at the edge of the orchard. Rowan School, all are welcome. By noon, children were arriving barefoot, sunburned, eager. They sat on crates and blankets beneath blooming trees. Birds chirped overhead. Wind moved through the leaves like breath. And Annalise, standing before them in a borrowed straw hat and ink-stained dress, began to teach again. No chalkboards, no rules. Just learning and love. But even beauty has its enemies. A week into their open-air school, Thomas Merrick arrived, Clarissa on his arm, both looking disgusted. "This is absurd," he muttered. "Teaching like a gypsy. She's making a mockery of education," Clarissa hissed. "Is that what this is really about?" Annalise said, stepping forward. "That you couldn't control me, so now you want to erase me." Thomas's mouth twitched. "This isn't personal. Everything about this is personal." "Do you really think people will support this long-term?" Clarissa scoffed. Just then, Pastor Green arrived, trailing behind him were Miss Lydia, a dozen townspeople, and even Mrs. Winslow, who hadn't left her rocking chair in 3 years. "We brought lunch," Pastor Green said with a smile. "And some books. The children can't learn hungry." Clarissa paled. Thomas turned away. But Annalise just smiled, because they were losing. And she was finally winning something far more lasting than pride, a place, a purpose, a future. That night, beneath the stars, Caleb walked her home through the orchard path. The fireflies danced in the tall grass, and moonlight traced silver lines along the trees. "You did it," he said. "You built something no one can tear down. Not alone." He stopped walking. "You're not alone anymore. Not ever." Her breath caught. "Annalise Rowan," he said slowly, "I don't have fine words, but I've got land, and time, and a heart that knows yours when it hears it." She looked up at him. "You're asking?" "I'm asking," he said. "Stay, for good. Be my partner in this life." There were no tears, only a smile that came from the deepest, quietest part of her soul. Yes, the Rowan School had no bell tower, but that morning it had something better. A chorus of children's voices rising into the orchard air, carrying verses of a folk song Annalise had taught them the week before. "This land we stand, though small and bare, becomes a home when hearts declare, we are not less, we are not few. We write our names in morning dew." The harmony wasn't perfect, but it was real, loud, joyful. And the townsfolk heard it. They paused outside the smithy. They stepped out of the feed store. Even Mr. Harlan Graves lowered his newspaper on the post office porch, brow furrowed as if confused by the sound of children happy to learn without walls. Rufina clapped along from a blanket under the trees, and Caleb leaned against a nearby trunk, arms crossed, watching it all unfold, not with pride, but with peace. The kind a man carries when the woman he loves is changing the world one child at a time. Later that afternoon, Pastor Green arrived with a folded piece of parchment and a peculiar smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "A message from the county board," he said. Annalise froze half a sentence into explaining fractions. Her stomach knotted as she reached for the letter. But it wasn't another dismissal. It was an apology. Upon further review and multiple testimonies from townspeople, we acknowledge the community's support for Miss Rowan's methods and her contribution to the educational well-being of Juniper Hollow. The board formally recognizes her as an independent educator. She exhaled. The children cheered. And in the background, Clarissa Wainwright dropped her parasol in disbelief. That evening, as golden light slanted across the orchard, Caleb set a small table beneath the tallest apple tree, just for the two of them. "I thought this called for something a little more than a blanket," he said, smoothing the checkered cloth. There were mismatched plates, wildflowers in a mason jar, and 2 glasses of Rufina's cherry cider. "Is this a celebration?" Annalise asked, taking a seat. "It's a promise," Caleb replied. He slid a simple silver band from his pocket. No diamonds, no flourish. Just a ring shaped like the kind of life they were building, humble, strong, made to weather storms. "I know it's fast," he said, "but I've seen more of your soul in the past weeks than most see in a lifetime." Annalise stared at him, heart full. "You were never too much," he added. "You were just waiting for a place that could hold all of you." She reached for his hand. "You found me that place," she said, "and I want to grow old here with you." They didn't plan a grand wedding. There were no carriages, no bouquets of imported roses. Instead, on a clear Sunday morning, surrounded by students, neighbors, friends, and rows of apple blossoms, they spoke their vows under the same tree where they had shared their first honest kiss. Doña Rufina wore blue and cried the entire time. Javier played the fiddle. Pastor Green officiated, his voice carrying like a hymn on wind. And when Annalise said, "I do," it wasn't with hesitation, it was with the full weight of a woman who had chosen love after loss, joy after shame, and herself after silence. As the sun set behind the hills, the orchard filled with laughter music and the scent of fresh-baked bread. Annalise stepped aside for a moment, watching Caleb laugh with the children. He lifted Susie onto his shoulders, careful not to spill her cup of cider. A breeze stirred the hem of Annalise's dress, and she looked to the sky, whispering a thank you to whatever force had led her to Juniper Hollow, rejection, shame, pain, and all. Because this was everything. It was the last Saturday of spring when the stagecoach arrived. Dust swirled at the edge of Juniper Hollow's main street, and children ran barefoot to see who'd stepped off, expecting travelers or traders. Annalise was tending to the garden beds behind the schoolhouse when she heard the hush fall like a dropped curtain. And then came Rufina's voice, low and sure as a warning bell. "Annalise, you might want to see this." She wiped her hands on her apron, rose from the earth, and turned. Thomas Merrick, again. But this time he wasn't riding in on a fancy horse flanked by Clarissa and Pride. This time he carried a battered suitcase in one hand and in the other a boy. No more than 6, with pale eyes and wild brown curls clinging shyly to his coat. The town held its breath. So did Annalise. They met by the edge of the well where so many memories still clung like smoke. "Hello," Annalise, Thomas said quietly. She looked him over. His fine clothes were worn, his face less smug, more hollow. His hands trembled slightly when he pushed back his hair. "What are you doing here?" she asked. He glanced down at the boy. "This is Samuel, my son." Annalise blinked. "Yours and Clarissa's." His gaze shifted. "Clarissa died. Fever took her last winter. Her family sent me away, said I'd stained their name." Her breath caught. "Why come here?" "Because you were the only good thing I ever ran from." The audacity. And yet there was no anger in his voice, only fatigue, regret. "I thought you might hate me," he added. "I did," she said, "but I also forgave you." He looked up startled. "I had to," she said, "to live, to love again." His eyes dropped. "I heard you married. To the orchard man." "I did," she said and smiled. "The kindest man I've ever known." Thomas looked away, shoulders shaking once. "I just want my boy to have a chance, that's all." Caleb was in the barn when she found him sanding down a chair leg for the schoolhouse porch. "I won't turn them away," she said without preamble. He didn't look up, didn't think you would. She stepped closer. "Doesn't it bother you?" He wiped sawdust from his hands and met her gaze, a little. She waited. "But I didn't marry you because you'd always choose me," he said. "I married you because you'd always choose what's right." Annalise leaned into his arms, and he held her like a man who wasn't afraid of her past, only in awe of how far she'd come. That Monday, Samuel joined the orchard school. He was shy, slow to trust, and cried for his mother at recess. But he took to numbers quickly and followed Javier around like a shadow. And Annalise, she never once saw Thomas try to reclaim what he lost. He sat at the back of the class, silent, folding laundry, for Rufina fixing fence posts, with Caleb building a different kind of apology with every nail and board. Clarissa's family came through a month later, offering to take Samuel to the city and raise him proper. Thomas refused. "Juniper Hollow is home now," he said, and not a soul disagreed. By midsummer, the town had changed. More children joined the school, even a few whose parents had once whispered behind their hands. A reading corner was built with furniture from Caleb. Pastor Green asked Annalise to lead a town-wide literacy program. Rufina planted sunflowers along the orchard fence. And as dusk fell across the hills one evening, Annalise stood with her hand resting on the gentle curve of her belly, a quiet miracle growing within her. The orchard was thick with late summer sun, golden and humming with bees. Apples ripened slowly in the heat, and the children had begun measuring the trees they'd planted at spring's end with hopeful yardsticks and chalk-marked hands. Annalise moved slower now. Her belly curved gently beneath a linen dress, her gait careful but steady. Every movement was purposeful, sacred. In her hands, she carried a legacy the town had once tried to deny her. She reached the schoolhouse, where laughter and chalk dust spilled through the open windows. Caleb was inside, balancing on a stool as he repaired the leaky corner of the roof shirt, loose and hand-strong. He grinned down at her. "You're late." She held up a jar of peach preserves. Bribery. They smiled like only people who had built something real together could. That afternoon, she sat beneath the old apple tree, the one where he had first kissed her, where they had said their vows, where the children now gathered for poetry readings and stories told in warm twilight. Samuel Merrick sat beside her, sketching in a dog-eared notebook. His father, Thomas, was across the way, mending a bench with Rufina. No one called him the one who left anymore. They called him the man who stayed, and that was enough. Near sunset, Pastor Green hosted a gathering at the church. Not a sermon, an announcement. "The county board has officially declared the Rowan School a model rural learning institution," he read, pride in his voice. "It will receive funding support and the freedom to continue its innovative approach." There was applause, there were tears, And when the crowd looked to Annalise, she didn't stand tall like she had something to prove. She simply stood with peace, with grace, with a child moving beneath her skin, and a world changed by her refusal to disappear. "I didn't come here to be special," she said. "I came here hoping someone would make space for me." She looked around. "But I learned something better. I made that space myself, and now it's yours too." The baby came at harvest. A girl. They named her Hope. Born on a crisp October morning, beneath the first leaves turning gold. Caleb cried when he held her. Annalise laughed, exhausted, radiant whole. Doña Rufina refused to leave her side for days. Javier built a wooden cradle, and even Clarissa's brother sent a letter of congratulations, scrawled in stiff but apologetic cursive. The town celebrated not with fanfare, but with quiet acts of care, fresh bread on the doorstep flowers, tied to the orchard fence candles lit in windows. Years later, children would say, "Miss Annalise built this place." But those who knew better said, "She built herself," and the town followed. And long after the last class was dismissed, after the trees grew old and tall, the orchard still held their story etched into the worn bark and whispered through leaves with every passing wind. She had come to Juniper Hollow with a broken heart and a letter of rejection. She left a legacy of courage, community, and love that asked for nothing but truth. If Annalise's journey moved you, comment with the word legacy and share the moment you felt most connected to her path. Like, share, and subscribe to help us bring more stories like this into the light. And remember, sometimes the love we find is the one we give ourselves permission to receive. Thank you for walking with Annalise through all 10 parts of this story.